appointment of Councillor Alex Smith as Vice Chairman for 2020-21. Can I have all those in favour of that motion, please?
Aye.
Favour.
Aye. In favour.
Okay, thank you. Anybody against or abstaining? No, that's duly noted. So Councillor Alex Smith is Vice Chairman. Item 3 is apologies for absence. So over to you, Charlie.
Thank you, Chairman. I've received no apologies for absence this evening.
Thank you very much. Next item is the minutes of the meeting held on the 11th of May 2020. You'll have a copy of those minutes. Can I take those as an accurate record of that meeting? Anybody? Agreement?
Yes.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Anybody disagree? Or
Sorry,
point?
Peter.
Yes.
I was actually present at the meeting, but because I didn't have access online, so I did email Ben about this the other day, but I actually sort of sat through the meeting, but I couldn't actually partake because of the IT problems. So it's a technicality, but I was actually present at the meeting.
I'm perfectly happy to amend that. Charlie,
Sorry.
did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you. Under the new sort of rules and guidelines with these remote meetings, it must be the case that a member must be seen but must be heard, be able to be heard during a meeting. So unless we were able to hear you, if you were viewing it as a member of the public, as I guess you would call it from the outside, I don't think that would be the case. I can double check for you.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, if you can, Charlie, because it was very frustrating that, down to no fault of my own, I was literally present, but obviously I couldn't physically speak, so just a little bit annoying.
okay, thank you. Well, I note what you say, Councillor Capelbrook, and Charlie, you'll confirm what the regulations say, and if they allow your name to be added, it will be. If not, unfortunately not. Okay. Which takes us on to the minutes. We did affirm those, I believe. The next item then is to receive any declarations of interest. None of those at the moment. Okay, if anything occurs as we go forward, please indicate. Item 6, if somebody could mute their microphone. We're getting a lot of paper rustling, I think it is. Item 6, questions by members under Council Procedure Rule 10.3.
There were no questions received, Chairman.
Thank you very much. That takes us straight on to item 7, Internal Audit Annual Report and Opinion. So I believe, Rachel, that is over to you.
It is. Thank you, Chair. Can everybody hear me okay?
I can indeed, thank you.
Yep.
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. So just to take you through the report then. So each year I am required as your Head of Internal Audit to provide an opinion over the Council's governance, risk and control framework. So this is primarily based on the outcomes of the audit assignments that we delivered during the year as part of the audit plan, hence why we need to make sure it has the right level of coverage. And it's also based on the action plans that arise from those audits and the monitoring of the implementation of the actions that arise from them. So my item this evening is the annual internal audit report and opinion for the financial year 2019-20, and a full copy of the report is provided as Appendix A to your papers today. So it's quite a lengthy report, so I'll just take you through some of the key sections and then I'm happy to take any questions on the detail. So overall, my opinion is provided in the shaded box on page 2 onwards of the appendix. And overall, I've given an assurance opinion of sufficient assurance, and this is consistent with the opinion that's been given in the last few years. And it's the basis for my opinion is obviously then detailed within the rest of the report further. So overall, the controls that we tested during the year, particularly those in relation to the financial systems key controls, were generally really strong, and we've given some good assurance opinions throughout the year. And I think this is summarised well on page 4 of the report in table 1, where you can see that actually 87% of the audit opinions we gave during the last financial year were of satisfactory opinion or of sufficient assurance or higher. So as again, obviously that's showing an improvement on last year. I've given you last year's figures as a comparator. And as you can see, as I say, over almost 90% are satisfactory or higher, reflecting no significant areas of risk. I have also had to reflect within the report the findings of the asset management audit, which was presented to this committee earlier this year, which did identify some areas of weakness and received a limited assurance opinion overall. And because of the nature of the findings was a major organisational risk. So that has impacted upon the overall opinion for the year. The opinion is also impacted slightly upon by the implementation of audit recommendations, which is lower than we would have expected during the last 12 months. We do continue to monitor that, and we've obviously discussed this at the committee during the year as well. And there's further details on that within the report. So the majority of the audits that are summarised in the report have already been presented to this committee as summaries because they were completed during the last 12 months. But for completeness, I have provided you with a summary of all of the audit assignments completed during the last 12 months as Appendix 1 to this report this evening. And that's provided on pages 12 onwards. And as I say, each of those, it sets out the scope of the audit and the findings and the assurance opinions that we have given overall. On page 7, in table 4, there is a summary of the implementation rate on audit recommendations. I've also provided within table 5 on the following page an overview of the recommendations which were overdue as at the end of the financial year. So we continue to monitor these and make sure that those are completed on an ongoing basis, and we'll continue to report back to the committee as and when those are closed. Hopefully in the next few months. So the rest of the report sets out the performance of the Internal Audit Service itself, so how we've performed against our own performance standards and targets. As you can see, I'm pleased to be able to confirm that all of the audit plan was delivered for you in line with what was agreed, and we've also exceeded our performance targets in terms of customer satisfaction feedback as well, which is a positive outcome. I've also reported back for you to give you assurances in terms of the committee's assurance over the council's compliance with the public sector internal audit standards, both in terms of our resourcing and how we conduct your audits. And based on a self-assessment, we are compliant with the standards and remain with no need to take any further action in those areas. So that's a quick run through of the key sections of the report, but I'm happy to take any questions on any of the further detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and I'm very pleased that it is a satisfactory audit opinion that is, I think, largely due to the pressure and the searching by this committee. So colleagues, thank you very much for all your efforts on that, that certain things have been followed up on. You mentioned two things, Rachel, the asset management and IT, and they're on the agenda later on, so we'll take those at that point. Colleagues, any questions that anybody has of Rachel, or any comments you wish to make?
No, it looks like no. Sylvia, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the temporary workers, organisation impact being moderate, and the rising costs, which is to be expected. But I think we need the reassurance that when you start doing that, you're bringing people in the rule, the framework in which against you should be there. And it says here that HR are not involved. It says, and then no central involvement in engaging such workers from HR. I just wondered how that's happening.
Is there anybody who can come in on that? It would appear not. Okay, I think that's...
I'm happy to respond to that in the first instance, Chair.
If you would then, please, Glenn.
I think in terms of that particular audit, Councillor Hughes, that was one that was undertaken a little while ago in the financial year, and I think it's fair to say that the council has had relatively few interim and temporary members of staff at that point in time, but they were increasing, which is why the audit took place, to make sure that we had the appropriate procedures in place, because it was an area of we felt was a risk. And certainly the response to that, in response to those recommendations, HR have been at the forefront of those, and certainly are in the process about putting those processes and procedures in place. But obviously it's one that is in the process of being done in accordance with the outcomes of the audit and the recommendations. So it's definitely an improving situation, particularly as we have seen, further interim staff and temporary staff come into the organisation, mainly as a result of the move to the unitary agenda.
Yes, yes, thank you. And I guess, has the COVID had any impact on it? Have we had to take more temporary people on? Has that had any impact?
In terms of the overall staffing position for the organisation, we have got a process in place which monitors the resource availability of staff, particularly on the back of the COVID pandemic. And we haven't had any major staffing issues in terms of capacity wise. The biggest challenge we've faced is that we've had obviously a lot of the staff have been having to work from home, rather than them being, actually, not being able to work directly as a result of COVID. So in terms of temporary staff, no, we haven't brought any specific people in directly as a result of COVID.
Okay, can I ask one more question, Chair?
Yeah, of course you may, please do.
Do we have policies in place about lone working and about remote working since that happened quite suddenly to us, or did we have those in place before?
I wonder on that, if we're giving Glenn a chance to think the answer to that one. Of course, if people are working from home, does that come under lone working? Lone working, as I always understood it, was where people went out and had to call in on other people, or were out in areas other than their own home and therefore could be at risk.
It could even be the only person in the office as well. I'm trying to remember if we have a policy. I'm sure we will.
In terms of the short answer is yes, we do. I think the bit that COVID has done has given us, we've had to think slightly differently about that, because there are different risks that we need to manage as a result of the COVID situation. And when Mike Deakin updated us at the last meeting, he went through a number of the risks that we were facing and how we were managing them. And as I say, he will give us an update a bit later on when we come to the report on risk management about what we're doing. But the focus of that is very much turning, rather than reactively to a position that was occurring very, very quickly, it's more proactively about managing the risks of the next sort of, the releasing of the lockdown, rather than the implications of going directly into it.
Yeah, thank you. That's good reassurance. Thank you, Chair.
Hey, you're most welcome. Thank you for those. And perhaps that's something you could ask again when Mike gives his presentation a little later on. Are there any other comments anybody else wishes to add? Okay, in that case, can we look at the recommendation at 11.1? And we are recommended to note the annual internal audit report and opinion for 2019-20. All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you very much. That is duly noted. Let us move on then to item 8, which is the risk management update. If you find that on your papers, if you're like me, trying to get them all jumbled out. Okay, who's taking us through this one, please?
I am presenting this report, Chairman, Catherine Hayward.
Oh, Catherine. Okay, thank you very much. Over to you.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman. So I'm presenting here, members, with a report on the Council's risk register for Q4 of 2019-20, which is up to the 31st of March 2020. As the committee will be aware, the Council manages risk on a daily basis and has processes in place for identifying, evaluating and managing risk across the organisation. The risk management strategy was last approved by Governance and Audit Committee on the 28th of September 2015. A full risk report for Q4 2019-20 is set out at Appendix 1 to the report, covering corporate risks, high priority risks, risks with a very high impact score, new risks and any overdue risk actions, although there were no overdue risk actions to report in Q4. In terms of new risk, there was one new risk identified in Q4 relating to COVID-19, although an update was provided at the last meeting of this committee due to the significant impacts of that risk. In May 2020, the government issued Working Safely During Coronavirus Guidelines, which set out how workplaces should respond to the phased lifting of restrictions. At ENC, a risk assessment group has been set up to develop a corporate workplace risk assessment which relates specifically to COVID-19 as required by the new government guidelines. The work undertaken by this risk assessment group is just one part of the very extensive work the Council's carrying out in response to the corporate COVID-19 risk. This risk is very rapidly evolving, and as such, the Head of Environmental Services, Mike Deacon, is here to provide a verbal update to the committee on the latest position. I'd also note that the report identifies a new risk which was noted in Q1 2020-21 in relation to the Council's statutory duty under Section 149 of the Environmental Protection Act in relation to the safekeeping of stray dogs. This risk will be fully assessed and scored and the appropriate risk actions identified, and it will be included in the next full Q1 2020-21 risk report to this committee. If there are any questions regarding the risk report and Appendix 1, I'd be happy to take them, and any detail on the COVID-19 risk, I'd like to hand over to Mike to provide a full update. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Catherine. Yes, I looked at 4.3 on the front sheet there about the stray dogs, and I take it the ill health issues are to do with the organisation that we had been using. Am I correct in that? Somebody? Anybody?
Would you like me to pick that one as well? Yeah. Unfortunately, the kennel owners passed away, and the family are not intending to keep the business going. So we've had to look for alternative arrangements, so you can have a right up to date update in that we have secured temporary arrangements, and you probably passed them on your. Oh no, nobody came into the office. Sorry, and they the Denford Edge kennels. So.
Yeah, I know. Lovely. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you everybody for a very comprehensive risk report. Are there any questions anybody has? For once, I find myself not finding any questions I want to ask about this. I normally have something, but no, they all seem very explanatory, and the information given against each one does make it quite clear, really, the reasoning behind them. I did ask why under corporate 019, councillors breaching the code of conduct and constitution was rated at 8. I thought we were a wonderful bunch and are not likely to do anything, but perhaps, who knows. So unless there are any other comments or anybody wishes to make a comment, I'll go straight to the resolution in that case. Are we happy with that? Okay, the resolution is that we are recommended to note the status of risks included in the report for the period to 31st of March 2020. Are we all happy to note that? Thank you very much indeed.
Everyone's noted.
Thank you. Okay, it takes us then to item 9 on the agenda, resources risk review, which is a verbal report from Mike Deacon. So over to you, Mike.
You caught me out there, Chair, because I thought I got away with it with the last report, but obviously not.
No.
Okay, so I'd like to approach the latest update on our COVID-19 response in 2 ways. The internal, what we've been doing internally, and that hopefully will provide assurance to the question that Councillor Hughes asked earlier, and then go into some of the illustrate to members some of the work that's been going on external to the organisation that your officers have been involved with. I'd like to indulge members to start with putting a document up for your benefit, if you bear with me a second, which hopefully will illustrate the I'm hoping you can now see a flow chart in front of you.
I can see a flow chart, Mark, but I can't really read it, unfortunately.
Okay, right. I appreciate. Yeah, the details too small. Yeah. So I'll take it down and I'll talk you through it verbally.
Yeah.
So what we've been doing internally, as Catherine set the scene in her report, we have formed a risk assessment group with representation from various service areas, including HR and the unions, and we've split the task into doing a generic risk assessment for the business, then looking specifically at the premises that we operate out of, and those are mainly East Northamptonshire House, the Rushden Centre and Oundle. We're also looking at home working, so we are undertaking a piece of work around the suitability for people working from home, which you'll appreciate we had to do some very take some rapid steps and decisions 10-12 weeks ago. We're now revisiting those decisions, revisiting some of those arrangements to make sure that the arrangements are fit and proper and our officers are safe to work in these environments. We're also we'll, as a consequence of the other risk assessment area that we're working on is people. You'll appreciate that through this pandemic that the vulnerable, the shielded, and certain people with certain characteristics have been increasingly susceptible to the virus. We recognise that, and we'll be undertaking a specific piece of risk assessment work around identifying those members of staff who we may need to take additional measures or put additional safeguards in place, recognising the learning that's taken place over the last 10 to 12 weeks. Those pieces of work are all well in train. Corporate management team have the sign-off for those documents. What I will do will hopefully share that flow chart that I tried to share with you earlier in the minutes to the meeting for your information. We're now at the stage where we're getting very close to producing the certificates that we need to produce to say that we are the premises are and our activities are fit and safe to continue taking into consideration the COVID-19 risks. Something else that we are working towards, and it is a target, is to reopen to the public the East Northamptonshire House in Thrapston in early July. I stress that that's a target, and it's something that it will be dependent on us being able to carry out the actions that we've identified through the risk assessments and ensuring all the safeguards are in place. So possibly at the next governance and audit, it may be an opportunity to run through some of those steps and measures that will have been put in place for the reopening of the offices. what we intend to do then is to learn from that and see if we can similarly reopen the Russian Centre and the Oundle Centre, or our desk in the Oundle Centre. But obviously we won't do any of that unless we are satisfied that it's safe for our officers and members of the public to access those services and provide those services. So that's what's been going on internally. Externally, your officers have been involved in a variety of county-wide groups. One of those is around the Safer Public Places task force, which has been in place for the last couple of weeks, well, the last week or so, to try and prepare our high streets and our public places for reopening. As you'll appreciate, that a lot of that took place on Monday with the reopening of the retail sector, and your officers have been heavily involved in supporting businesses and preparing those locations for the return of the public and shoppers to those areas. We'll also be working with a view to the next key date, which is again early July, where the hospitality industry will start to restore its activity. So we are, again, officers are working on those task groups to ensure that East Northamptonshire is a safe place for people to visit and to start using again. That also ties in with safe travel plans, and again, that officers are involved in developing those. Officers are also involved in the development of the outbreak prevention and control plan, which is the local delivery of the national track and trace test and trace system that you may have heard of. And we are working under the leadership of the Director of Public Health from the County Council, and we've got officers involved in that, in those groups to, as your EHO, your environmental health officers will be at the forefront of doing some of the contact tracing around outbreaks when they are identified. I'll just check my notes, if you bear with me. And then also we have funding. So there are various streams of funding being made available to the council, whether that's through opening up the high streets or through implementing test and tracing systems. And again, your finance officers are heavily involved, not only locally, but on a county-wide basis in ensuring that those monies are utilised and spent appropriately. So hopefully that provides you with a little bit of a snapshot of what's happening both inside the organisation and the involvement of your officers on a wider scale as well. So happy to take questions and provide any clarification I can, and apologies for that botched attempt to provide you with a visual representation, which would have been much better than what I've just said for the last 5 minutes.
Oh, I disagree with you there entirely. Robin, over to you.
Yeah, so I'd just like to ask a question about home working. If you ring member services, they then get in touch with the person who's at home. Why can't you ring member service? Why can't you just dial the number of the person, you know, in the book 01832 whatever, and go direct? Because other people I know that are working from home, they just ring up their business number. We seem to have to go through a long rigmarole to get to the person. As I say, we ring the number at Thraps and they say, well, we'll email the person who's at home and she'll ring you. It seems to be a long-winded method where other companies I know, particularly Unilever, who are working from home at the moment, go straight, you ring their works number and then it goes straight through to the person at home.
Okay, I can see that Kelvin's on the line and he may be in a better position to respond to the question, Councillor. But what I would like to point out is that in a very short space of time, we managed to get a significant proportion of the council's workforce out of the office and working from home. Now, to facilitate that, there was a huge and tremendous effort from our ICT team to enable that. And I think if you were to compare what we've undertaken and completed as a council with other councils in Northamptonshire, you'll find that it's exemplary in terms of what we've achieved. Accepting that it's not a perfect system, and yes, there are companies who have been able to provide that direct connection, but I can assure you that we are not unique as a council in having to have steps in the way that officers are contactable, and I know that the county council equally has a similar issue with that. But as I say, Kelvin might be in a better position to respond to that.
Before we bring Kelvin, and I notice Annabelle's got a question. I mean, I would like to just, I would just like to sort of endorse Robin's comment, because we had a new telephone system put in, which was, well, I thought was going to be all the bells and whistles, and it doesn't seem to be as effective as it could be, and it is very difficult if you need to make contact. As Robin said, you know, they'll ring you back. Well, of course, you yourself might not be available, because you don't know when they're going to ring back. Anyway, Annabelle.
Sorry, no, just a brief point. I've actually found that emailing officers is absolutely the best and easiest way to contact them, and almost without hesitation, the majority have got back to me either immediately or at an appointed time. So I'm just finding actually email contact is definitely a more efficient way of going about it than the excuse me, than the phone system.
Okay, point noted. Anything else? And Kelvin, is Kelvin there? Yes, Kelvin's here. Do you want to make any comment?
Yeah, just to comment on that, I think like Mike said, we were never going to get the perfect system in the time that we had. I think I can't comment particularly on why member services is in the situation it's in, but there are workaround ways of where people can contact officers directly on their internal telephone number at home. But a lot of that at the moment is reliant on officers sort of transferring their internal number onto a mobile phone. That's the situation we've been in. So, for instance, a lot of my officers, I've contacted some today, just dialing their ordering number, and it's gone through onto their mobile phone. What we didn't have time to do, and there would have been a great cost, is obviously get handsets, telephone handsets, out to all members of staff. The key was making sure they could work with a laptop. And obviously what we have done in the meantime is roll out MS Teams, and you can call officers direct using MS Teams. What we probably need to do is just send out some guidance notes to people to enable them to be able to do that, and I'll make sure that we action that tomorrow. But again, I can't comment on member services, but in terms of all my staff, I've never had a problem. I just contact them on MS Teams or ring them on their internal number, and it goes through to them. So I'll pick up the member services issue separately, and I will make sure that we roll out some notes to both members and officers as to how you can contact people directly using the systems that we've put in place.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Hopefully that will aid us in our making contact. I know, Mike, you mentioned somewhere about funds to opening the high street. Could you just explain that a little more, if you can?
Yes, money's been made available to all district councils to facilitate certain works and certain improvements to open up the high streets. One of the difficulties we're experiencing with accessing this money is it's European money, and that accessing European money comes with lots of hoops and hurdles that we have to get through, not least of which is if we want to put a sign up in this high street to stay 2 meters apart, we've got to ensure that there's the European logo incorporated in that signage. So it's okay. That's a minor detail, but yeah, accessing the and again, not wishing to pass the buck, but Glenn may be in a better position to answer the question on accessing funding. But yes, there is money available, but there are limits to and strict controls on what we can spend that money on. And maybe even Catherine can answer it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I was going to ask what sort of things would we be able to spend any funds on? So Catherine or Glenn, whichever.
I'm happy to start on that one, Chair.
Okay.
In terms of, as you will have no doubt heard, both on the daily news bulletins that is happening, there has been the provision of funds from central government to local authorities. And in terms of at a total level, certainly the work that we've done would tend to suggest that the level of the funds that are being made available aren't sufficient for all of the pressures that we're facing and the costs that we need to be incurring in order to get the economy and town centres and the area back to where it needs to be. So what we're doing at the moment is very much looking at the money that we have got, trying to access as many other funding streams, and Mike mentioned the European funding there as being one of those, in order to maximise that funding that we can get as a council. And one of the bits that you will see is the next Finance and Performance Subcommittee. They will be receiving a report on the latest financial monitoring position for the current year, and there will be a lot of information in there about the financial impact of COVID, how we're trying to fund it, and what we're doing in order to lobbying to get more resource in. The other bit I would say, in terms of trying to track at a national level how much funding local authorities need, there are monthly information surveys that we fill in as a council. We filled in 2 already, reporting back the expenditure that we are incurring, and also the forecast income losses we're expecting, to make sure that central governments are aware about the plight and the impact of COVID that local authorities are facing. We are currently this week, and Catherine is very busy, actually filling in the 3rd survey and response back to government along those lines. And what we'll be doing is incorporating the output of that into our reporting to Finance and Performance Subcommittee at its next meeting.
Okay, Catherine, is there anything you want to add?
There's nothing specific to add to Glenn's comments there, but as Glenn noted, there will be a full report taken to Finance and Performance Subcommittee on the 6th of May, covering the projected income losses and cost pressures to the council as a result of the crisis and the different sources of funding that we're looking to utilise. Okay,
but back to my original question, what sort of things are we able to do once we get the funding for our high streets? Okay, there's the issue of getting the funding, but if we get the funding, what can we actually do for our high streets?
Okay, so in terms of where the money is being spent at the minute is largely around information and signage. So you'll see a lot of there'll be a lot of signage erected and placed on pavements, etc. Installation of barriers and creation of one-way systems for pedestrians where possible. The closure of some streets, some high streets to traffic to enable safe pedestrian access to those locations. So it's, and possibly the installation of sanitizing fluid dispensers.
Yes,
if there's such a phrase, but hand sanitizer units installed in key locations in the high street. But it's at the minute there are a lot of schemes being worked up, particularly around encouraging people to take up cycling, to remove vehicle traffic, to again encourage people to walk and cycle. So some of the schemes that are being considered will obviously require investment, and we are looking at opportunities to develop our Greenway offer, utilising or accessing some of that money, and to dovetail into providing safer pedestrian cycling routes.
How does any of that, in that last bit, how does that impact on our high streets? And have we got any examples in our district where we have done things for our high streets?
It is a work in process, in progress, Councillor. That you'll appreciate that officers across the county are liaising with the town councils in respect of identifying what could be done. And then I was on a conference call earlier today where they were trying to identify consistency of signage that could then be installed across the county in all the high streets, and then achieve economies of scale in the procurement of those of that signage. So there are many schemes that are being investigated and being worked up, and hopefully will be implemented over the next few weeks.
Okay, right, thanks very much. I wonder, well, I'll come back to you in just a moment, Robin, I can see you there. If we could have a some sort of update on that situation for our next committee meeting, please. That sounds quite interesting.
Yeah, I'll ask Greg McDonald to provide you with that, as he is our lead on that particular workforce. I won't make any comment about you ducking out of that one, Mike. But, yeah. No, but thank you very much for that. Robin, sorry, over to you. I think your microphone's off, Robin.
Is it on now? It is, yes.
You are now. We have you live. And
yes, I just saying. I think there are stickers going down Royston High Street.
Oh,
or paths on Royston High Street. I think Royston Council have been out doing quite a bit of work down the High Street. So you have to persuade Orange Town Council to get going.
Well, I'm pleased to hear that in Royston. Thanks Robin. Okay, any other questions or comments for Mike on the resource risk review? And can we just note the verbal report? We don't formally have that as an item, but it's duly noted.
Excuse me, Chairman. That resources is actually Kelvin Turner to give you an update on.
Is it? Right, okay.
Mike is Environmental Services.
Is this item 9 and then Louise?
Yes.
Oh, right, thank you. So, sorry, Mike, you've been sort of dragged in on that one. Okay, Kelvin, sorry. Over to you.
Chair, just to be clear, Mike was commented on paragraph 3.4 of the risk report. It said there Mike was going to give a verbal update in respect of the COVID situation. So that was what Mike's just done. I was hoping I was going to get away with it and Mike would have presented the resources review, but never mind. Thanks for that, Louise. So, okay, sorry. In terms of my resources review, Chairman, if members turn to page 47 of the risk report, the one that Catherine and Mike have just presented, I'm just going to highlight 3 or 4 of those risks that fall under my area and just give members a little more detail in terms of what we're trying to do to mitigate some of those risks. So on page 47 of 60 of your agenda, the one I'm going to pick up first is the one right at the top of that page, which is called RM Corp 015 Risk of Successful Cyber Attack. Obviously, this is more and more.
Can I just, sorry to interrupt, my apologies, but I'm wondering, would this be better taken under item 10? I would welcome your thoughts on that, and yours, Glenn.
I think there are some areas I'm going to cover that probably wouldn't need to fit under item 10. So maybe if we get into discussions that would fall into the closed agenda, then we can perhaps defer them till then.
Okay, thank you. Right.
So on this particular one, risk of successful cyber attack, I think the key word in that risk is that word successful, because obviously we live in a day and age when attempts at cyber attacks are happening all the time. Members might also know them as what's called phishing attacks. That's phishing as in the PHISHING. That's where people try and get into council systems or business systems to try and extract things like bank details, personal data, credit card details, orders, purchase details, things like that. We obviously also have attacks not far off every day in terms of people trying to break through what's called our firewall systems, our security systems, in terms of our IT. And at the moment, we have successfully been able to combat them. We do have systems in place to block those attacks. We have things called Sophos and firewalls. But of course, cyber attack can also happen through human error. There are people that can, I think some members might have received emails in recent times. I think the most recent one was where we had a perpetrator trying to be the council leader, where emails were sent out to a number of members and officers to try and get them to respond to that. What we're trying to do, obviously, to mitigate this risk, because it's all about training and raising awareness. We do have on our ENC hub, the intranet, we do have what's called a cyber corner there, and that provides details for staff on training that's available, on information that's available to bring people up to date. We work very carefully with Northamptonshire Police on this, and we've recently put an update on there that the police have provided in respect of cyber security as well. There is going to be some more training. Members, I'll inform you now that over the next couple of weeks you will be getting an email about training that we'd like members to undertake using a system called Dojo, where there will be simple online training there to bring members up to speed, and staff will do it as well, in respect of raising this awareness about cyber security and potential attacks. So the risk is obviously, from an impact point of view, very high. In terms of from a likelihood, it's more medium, because, as I say, we've been able to combat all the potential attacks that we've had at us recently. Another area that ICT have been working on is we get regular what's called patching updates from our software suppliers, where there's things that we're able to put in place on the systems to block these attacks. But it has become an ever increasing, industry is probably the wrong word, but it's become ever increasing, amongst the criminal fraternity to try and attack councils and companies in this way. So that's the first one I'd like to highlight, Chair. I don't know if you want to take questions at this stage or we move through the other ones, Chair.
Are there any questions on that particular point? No, let's move on then. Okay,
the next one I'd like to highlight, if you go further down the page, on page 47, is the one that's called, it's third from bottom, RM Corp 028. It's called their failure of core ICT infrastructure leading to inability to provide services. Members will notice that the score there has actually increased the risk from the last time we reported it. The main reason for that is that there was what was termed a network outage just before Christmas at the council, whereby most of our systems were down for, I think it was about a day and a half working days, and it also covered a weekend as well. What we've done since to mitigate that, and this is where I'll be a little bit careful of some of the things I say, because we took a report to our Finance and Performance Committee on the 26th of May under a closed agenda item, so I won't name any companies or mention any companies at this stage, but that report basically asked members to approve the funding and also the procurement route to take on board a new what's called network support provider. So we were within a company that were providing all our telecommunications and ICT services reports. Their performance gradually got worse and worse during 2019, which led to that outage issue before Christmas. So we have undertaken an urgent review of whether we should carry on with them, whether we should go into an open tender situation, or the recommendation that we did make to finance and performance is that we were able to use a procurement framework that other councils in Northamptonshire have used to be able to save us time and money and able to get us a new supplier on board. So the committee agreed that we've got money in the budget to do that as well. And as we speak, we are sort of dotting I's and crossing T's in terms of the contract, the new contract going forward. So that will happen hopefully over the next few weeks. There are also other ways and means whereby obviously ICT can fail, leading to the inability to provide services, and we've had examples of them recently as well. Some of our servers were getting too hot, and we had to provide additional air conditioning so that they didn't effectively burn out at the end of the day. And what we've also been doing is improving our generator provision and what's called UPS system. UPS stands for uninterrupted power supplies, and I can give a really good example of that just from the last 24 hours. Certainly where I am, which is about 100 miles north of you, we had horrendous thunderstorms last night. We've just had some more over the last hour. I think at Thrapston there was one particularly bad one about 7 o'clock, 7:30 last night, and the lightning actually put the power out in terms of the ICT system, but within literally seconds or minutes we were able to get it back up through our uninterrupted power supply, and certainly those that were working on the time hardly noticed any difference other than a little gap of a couple of minutes. And that, I don't think that would have been quite the case a few months ago, but because of the additional work that we've put into these uninterrupted power supplies, those that were still working at that time were able to carry on working, and there were some, and I've talked to one today who was working at that time and was actually affected by that. So that's just some of the work we've been doing recently, but the reason why the risk went up was this was really at the end of March. We are still with our old supplier. When we get onto the new contract in a few weeks' time, that risk will be able to decrease back down again. I'll stop at that point, Chairman, and take any questions on that risk.
My only comment would I note that that was one of the issues in the IT audit that highlighted the UPS.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good to know that it's up and working. Any comments so far on that one? Okay, let's move on then, Kelvin.
The next one I want to highlight is the one just below that. So same page again, page 47. This time RM CORP 029, deterioration of staff health and well-being. Mike's already touched on this a little bit, but if I just take you a little bit further, we've increased the risk on this one, again, because of the COVID situation in terms of staff health and well-being. The good news is, unless Mike tells me differently, it's changed recently, none of our staff have actually been tested positive for COVID. Again, we might be able to reduce this risk at the end of the next quarter. That's why the risk's gone up, because of staff health and well-being, but obviously there's lots of other things that factor into staff health and well-being. And again, members touched on this earlier by asking questions about home working. And what I'd like to reassure members is we've been keeping a close eye on this, and we've done a recent staff survey, and the results of that were that 82% of our staff said that their health and well-being was actually better or the same since working from home, which was a real high percentage. Obviously, some staff were struggling and we are assisting them, and obviously where some staff are struggling from a mental health perspective, working at home all the time, we're allowing them to come back into the office, because obviously we can facilitate that at the moment and still abide by all the social distancing rules that were in place. But real positives came out of this survey, and staff were saying that through working from home, they had a better work-life balance, even though obviously they can't do a lot outside of the home at the moment. Communication was vastly improved, and the environment that they were working in was improved as well. In fact, that they were finding less noise and disruption. There will always be exceptions to that, and obviously in this situation we feel sorry for those staff who've got young children that they've had to deal with and cope with, as well as working from home. And obviously managers have been allowing as much flexibility as possible in terms of their working arrangements. 1 or 2 staff commented in the survey about loneliness, and we've obviously been able to roll out MS Teams. We're all talking to each other on this tonight. We've rolled that out to staff so that they can see each other face to face and talk to each other face to face to try and alleviate that loneliness as well. And one thing again, I think Mike might have referred to it earlier, what we've also just done with staff is what we've called a home worker risk assessment, where we've had more than 140 responses to that. And again, only a very small number have identified issues that we need to deal with, and managers are going to be working on that over the next few days with those staff. And that might be simple things like, although they're able to work from home, they might not have the right chair, they might not have the right screen. There might be things that we can do to help them with chairs in the office, with purchasing some, to be able to help them in that respect. So we've done a lot of work on this. Although the risk has gone up because of COVID, overall staff health and well-being has increased. And although we haven't got the exact figures, when we get the figures at the end of June, I think that will clearly show that staff sickness has got dropped dramatically during this first quarter of the year. And one of the benefits of home working for staff is sometimes when you wake up in the morning and you maybe have that bit of a headache, or maybe you feel a cold's coming on, or you maybe have an upset tummy. The beauty of home working is that if that's passed by 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, you can just get down and do your normal work for that day. Whereas in the past, staff might have rung up at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning saying they weren't going to be in the office that day because they were sick. So our actual sickness figures we're expecting to see decrease dramatically at the end of the first quarter as well. So hopefully, although the risk's gone up because of COVID, I'm trying to reassure members that we're doing all we can to ensure that staff are still being looked after and cared for, even though they are working in a totally different way than they were 3 months ago. I'll pause at that point again, Chairman.
Thank you, Kelvin, and it's good to know that we are taking all of those steps to make sure our key assets, being our staff, are looked after. Any other comments or questions members would like to raise? No? Okay, Kelvin, carry on.
The last one I want to highlight from my side is on page 48. So over the page, second one down, it's the one that's headed up RMCORP 033. And this is the risk of loss impacting the council as a result of fraudulent activity. The reason for highlighting this one is not because we suddenly got a large number of frauds going on. It's purely and simply because there's been more opportunity for fraud, particularly in the business world, since COVID came in, because as members will be aware from the bulletins that we've been issued, we've been given a lot of money by the government, around about 18 million pounds, to give out to businesses to help them through this crisis. That obviously could immediately lend itself to potential fraudulent activity, but the processes and procedures and the checks that Lucy Hogston's team have put in place in revenues and benefits have meant that obviously, although 1 or 2 people might have tried it on, at this moment in time, we're not aware of any particular fraud that's been committed. I touched base with Lucy earlier, and though she said 1 or 2 people had tried it on, our systems had sort of earmarked that they weren't entitled to these grants under the criteria set down by the government. So at this moment in time, we've had no fraudulent activity. The reason that was important for us as a council is because where we'd paid monies out due to and the claim was a fraud, then the government wouldn't have given us the funding for that. We would have had to have funded it ourselves from our own bank account sort of thing. So that's just a simple reason why I'm highlighting that one. We've had an awful lot of money, an awful lot of grants being paid out, but the systems that Lucy and the team have put into place have worked tremendously over the last few months.
That is very good to know. And you're right, it's obviously an opportunity for some to try and see what they can get in, whether they are due it or not. Are there any comments or questions from any members or any of the officers? In which case, Calvin, can I thank you very much indeed for a very comprehensive report there. Duly noted. Thank you. Right, I'm going to ask the committee now, we're likely to exclude the press and public from the meeting during the consideration of the following item of business in accordance with section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, because exempt information may be disclosed. Could I have somebody propose that, please?
Proposed, Chair.
Seconded?
Seconded.
Thank you. In favour?
Aye.
Yeah.
Aye.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll pause a moment until Louise confirms that that has actually taken place.